Ladies and gentlemen, this is Scott Pollock, Chief Editor of the Critical Post Chicago, reporting. Welcome to another edition of the Goldwater Report. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for visiting us here at the Critical Post Chicago. As many of you might know, and some will learn, the only time we take to the airwaves is when it's important enough to do so. This is not an entertainment platform, nor is it a platform for propaganda. Now, in light of the attack by Islamic extremists from Syria or other parts of the Middle East recently in Paris, France, we'd like to file the following report and opinion. Some of the analysts that we listen to here at the Critical Post speak to the fact that indeed we have a cadre of people in highly monetized positions throughout the American and NATO alliance-founded transnational corporations, which is actually correctly otherwise known as the global regime of international economic interdependence, that have hitherto hijacked the political systems of the Western world to accrue to their favor for their own private corporate benefits. In short, they have founded a new form of monopolism that is more concealed than in the earlier days of the 20th century, and for the time being, they can be accurately described as crypto monopolies that have cross-pollinated boards of directors. These crypto monopolies have been aggregating corporations for the last 50 years, predominantly in food production, weapons and tools manufacturing, water filtration and electrical manufacturing and manufactured items, computing and space technologies, along with oil product distribution and oil product derivative manufacturing. What we don't hear from anyone of the political class, whom are their henchmen or their highly monetized supporters, is that it should be considered unethical for politicians serving in Washington, D.C., London, Tokyo, Paris, Sydney, Hong Kong, Berlin, Beijing, and Moscow, along with other important capitals, to speak with corporations or their lobbying organizations for any reasons whatsoever. That in fact, the only access to politicians should be of a private citizen one-on-one with any particular politician to address their grievances. Competing narratives of interest groups should be ignored in political processes because anyone can see the abuse that this activity foments in all countries across the face of the globe, not to mention here in America. Other analysts we listen to speak to the facts about the actual aim of modern Muslim population ambitions for conquering the Western world, and we make note here that the PR war being waged by the Council on American Islamic Relations, which among other things as an organization, is a front group for a society of men calling themselves the Muslim Brotherhood, Hezbollah, and others. Then we have the faux analysis of others in alternative news, like InfoWars, founded by Alex Jones, who is supported at times by Matt Drudge from the Drudge Report. Mr. Jones' mantra is the globalists are coming, the globalists are coming, and while you're at it, buy my water filters, vitamins, and nutraceuticals to cleanse your body and your mind. You are part of the resistance. Alex Jones is a somewhat clueless 41-year-old man with a revisionist history narrative which he claims is more correct than what you were taught in school. His entire platform is one big, long editorial. He's entertainment for the paranoid and confused, along with his more mainstream buddy, Matt Drudge. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no confusion if we see things for what they are. And this war on terrorism is a corporate war being waged by the NATO alliance-founded transnational crypto monopolies. This so-called euphemistic phrase, the globalist, used by people like Alex Jones and other folks in what we refer to here as fringe media, whose audience demographic is mainly from the equally uninformed bigots in the freedom, liberty, patriot movement populations, describes something that has been in existence now for over a century, and the fact is quite plainly seen by any informed eye. The crypto monopolists have been controlling things for their interests for a very long time, and this is disguised in the political mantra or narrative known as the modern era of progressive socialist politics designed for control by these very same crypto monopolists and their political henchmen in the governments that they buy and in the guise of something they call and try to tell us is free market capitalism. In other words, what we have is a socialist control system and rule by corporate bankocracy being practiced everywhere in the world, as well as here in America and across the pond in the capitals of Europe. Anyone paying attention can see it is anything but a free market. It's a market that's rigged by the governments everywhere across the developed world for their private corporate sponsors and for their banking systems, of which there are several central banking cartels. Ladies and gentlemen, our analysis of terrorism as a narrative that is part fiction and part real and as a propaganda tool works very well in two areas. One, in keeping you distracted from paying attention to what is important, namely the money being confiscated from your paychecks on a weekly basis from several fronts of tyrannical taxation structures here in America and throughout the world. And two, disguising what is actually going on within a systematic pattern that is concentrating the world's wealth into the transnational corporate crypto monopolies, both East, in Russia and China, and the West. The Russian Sino or Chinese initiatives in these areas are merely a copycat initiative by them because they have seen the success of NATO's use of the very same programs. Ladies and gentlemen, they're just a little late to the game. The real reason for the war on terror, as it's known in the propaganda journalism press, is that there are two competing pipeline construction projects, one originating from Qatar on the west coast of the Persian Gulf, and one operating and originating from Iran on the east coast of the Persian Gulf, as well as a fight for rare earth minerals across the globe and now being ensued in Africa. Propaganda about Afghanistan was actually about the fact that they found $1 trillion worth of rare earth minerals in the mountains of Afghanistan. Turning our attention back to the Persian Gulf, Russia's Gazprom has the contract for the Iranian pipeline. Others in NATO have the contracts for the pipeline out of Qatar. Now, NATO alliance transnationals want Assad out of the way because he backed out of a deal he'd made earlier to let the Qatar pipeline project go through his territory. Both pipelines want to bring their energy product to the European market. Both pipelines have been in the planning stages for years. On the political side, which is obviously an obfuscation or concealment of the businesses at hand, the following is easily noticeable. The facts have been and remain regarding what can only be termed as a Muslim invasion into the West is that Muslim clerics, having no moral compass of any high-minded origins whatsoever, are practicing a macabre form of child abuse by indoctrinating children from a very early age to hate the West and Israel, and then to exploit them later in life for sacrificing themselves in the name of their jihads. What has remained from the public's view is that there are a whole compendium of groups that have been fostered by projects emanating from the corrupt United Nations, which have been in operation since 2002 or 2003, importing Muslim refugees around the Western world and here into America. The United Nations, as we all know, is a proxy for international governing bodies which remain out of reach of any accountability to the public. And what we're watching is, again, as we've stated before in a previous broadcast, we are watching the composting of the Middle East and those countries. As for terrorism as an international concern, has anyone in the clueless propaganda press asked these questions? Who is paying these young people to commit these suicide attacks? Is there some kind of link that takes into account the particular family situations where these young men originate? Would it be different if these young men had productive employment? In fact, would there be any terrorism at all if the ability for these feckless, brainwashed young men were not able to be exploited by a political system such as Islam, which feeds upon their lack of gainful employment? Is it reasonable to assume that, in fact, these young men are being promised behind the scenes by members of the monarchies in the oil-producing families in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula and elsewhere like Tehran that their families will be taken care of if they commit suicide in the name of jihad? Do these young men, because of lack of economic opportunity, think this is the only way forward for their families to get out of bondage? Other than natural gas and oil, what industry, export or import, is produced by these countries, largely comprised of land that is basically unarable or unfarmable except in small areas? The answer is not much. Some say terrorism as a fact of existence is a way to erode your freedom by powers in the business community of providing security. There's the jingoists who want to convince you we need these highly complex security apparatuses to keep folks safe, when in fact there's too many soft targets like the ones just seen in Paris which can be exploited. Some in the fringe media proclaim it's the gun-grabbing progressives and all they're doing, and it is a proxy way to take privately held weapons out of the market and out of the hands of private citizens. Perhaps something the international banking cartels, the bankocracy, want as well. Anyone who is paying attention to the culture of the Middle East knows that the families concentrated around the House of Saud are proxies and partners of what we know back here to be the Bush family banking dynasty. As well, these Hashemites and their relatives are the most two-faced and lawless tribe, along with their enemies in Tehran, in that entire region. Ladies and gentlemen, terrorism is a narrative that's rooted in a semantical operation known as fear pornography. It's the greatest distraction of modern times. Bloodlust sells on television and elsewhere, and it sells big time, and all of the propagandist journalism press, everywhere, in every country they operate, is complicit, and some are too stupid to analyze what's really going on. As we've stated before, propaganda also can be seen as a physical manifestation. Ladies and gentlemen, Americans and Europeans are still faced with understanding first which NATO alliance transnational crypto monopolies will benefit most from the Qatar pipeline, besides the House of Saud and their friends in Qatar. The names of these oil pipeline construction firms are hidden from plain view. However, in light of that, we are still bid to make a cognitive choice as to whether we, as nations peoples, back these interests or we don't. All the while understanding that these entities could care less about the safety of anything but their bottom line and their stockholders. It's just business. And as we all know in the Western world, business is important to all of us. However, we've all seen we can't use progressive socialist thinking to temper business with humanitarian concerns without eradicating unethical behavior by those in the most powerful of positions. No political system has yet been devised as to how to curb the desires of unbridled greed and lust for ever-increasing affluence, let alone the degradation of the banking cartel money inflation system. Our considered opinion is terrorism will cease to exist as soon as the House of Saud and their Arabian allies are exterminated by whatever means is most efficient, along with a few other hotbeds of radical proportion in Tehran and Islamabad, Pakistan. What needs to happen, as unthinkable as it may be, is for someone to have the political resolve to drop a few nuclear weapons on the cities of Riyadh, Tehran, and Islamabad, and while they're at it, they can take out that child dictator in North Korea by dropping another one on Pyongyang. This kind of activity had a very cooling effect on the Japanese at the end of World War II, and others. Why wouldn't it have the same effect on these other populations? How this should happen is as follows. The Western interests should handle the House of Saud. The Russian Sino or Chinese interests should handle Tehran, and then both jointly on Islamabad and Pyongyang. In that manner, the detente between East and West is still held in a balanced response parity which serves the geopolitical aspects of the balance of power. It is only that kind of resolve exercised simultaneously by an East-West combined united response which will put an end to the festering wound known as radical Islam and satisfy the balance of superpower economies. It will put on notice to everyone across the world that the kind of child abuse being practiced by Muslim clerics will not be tolerated any longer. And that will serve to inform the people down in Indonesia. That is the choice in its most basic format. The obvious facts which are hidden from plain view, as best as is practicable by the propagandists of the world's largest economies, is that the drip, drip, drip of terrorism activities only serves the arms industries to continue making large quantities of conventional weapons, which serves the bottom lines of weapons manufacturers of the transnational crypto monopolies of both the West and their copycat operators in the East. It's really good for business. The weapons business. Again, the competing interests of Iranian oil versus Saudi oil to Europe is what the war is about, and make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, the humanitarian side of this, which the political henchmen of these interests represent to us, is at very best a minor issue in their corporate eyes, and yet at the same time used to achieve several initiatives disguised as their real and pressing concerns. The political henchmen, which are actually nothing more than civilian contractors for government corporation dollars, their politicians get to take center stage to keep your eyes off of these transnational crypto monopolists and other semantical operations. The monopolists over in Europe are getting a pretty hefty price for a gallon of gas. Lots of money is at stake. Meanwhile, the dollar is still being bid pretty high in the foreign exchange money markets, all on the speculations of traders worldwide in the market, because the fraud known as the Federal Reserve is thinking about raising interest rates a measly 25 basis points. In the meantime, Muslim clerics continue to make money in their regional capacities and dominate their respective populations with a form of child abuse, which then later manifests as adolescent insanity, that as well, through social media and the social media, has been successful at getting a bunch of clueless, brainwashed youths of the Western world to join them. The reality is, modernity bids we have ample gas-driven transportation for the civilized world in the meantime. After all, you want to be able to drive that car, don't you? Now, to repeat, we're either for these transnational crypto monopolists or we're against them. The propagandist progressive left would probably feign we're against them, but hypocritically would still clutch the keys of their SUVs. The conservative right, calling for an end to this Islamofascism, are more than willing to bomb these creatures of Muslim clerical child abuse into the Stone Age. The question that needs to be addressed here between these propagandist narratives is, who are the adults in the room? This is Scott Pollock, chief editor of the Critical Post Chicago reporting. We'll be back soon with a report about circuit court and judicial malfeasance in Wayne County, Indiana, and the city of Richmond. Thank you for watching. That is all.